everybody. This is a really special time of the summer. We are a few days away from the graduate and professional school fair, incredibly important for our postbacks and for summer interns. And so I hope that all of you have had conversations with your research supervisors, with your PIs, letting them know that next week is a busy week for your professional development. If you're intimidated by having that conversation, setting those boundaries, talking about what you need, please reach out to us this week. We hope to see lots of you taking advantage of the fair next week. Today, we're going to talk about writing personal and research statements for graduate schools. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Sharon Milgram, and I direct the Office of Intramural Training and Education, and I have directed graduate programs both here at NIH and outside in my former job at UNC Chapel Hill, read lots and lots of statements. And so I'm going to give you some of my personal views of what makes a strong statement. I'm going to share the general consensus in the community. I'm going to talk about how to deal with various issues that you might want to address, and I'm going to do my best to take all of your questions, but I'm going to take them at the end. And because we're not in Zoom webinar where we have Q&A, what I would encourage you to do is hold off to put your questions into the chat towards the end. So it's always good to start with this question of why. Why do schools ask for a statement or statements? The reason it's so good to start with that question is when you know the why, then you can address the why directly. And so I want you to think about these written materials as your interview on paper. It is a chance for a school to get to know you a little bit. Obviously, it's still on paper. That's not really you. You are this three-dimensional human being, but it is a chance for them to get to know you better than a resume, better than a list of grades in courses. And they're doing that to decide if they want to get to know you further through an interview, through additional discussion. So this is your first presentation of yourself to the school. And the thing is that you might be a great candidate, but not a great candidate for that school and program. So the honest truth is they are not looking for great candidates for graduate school. They're looking for great graduate student candidates for their school. That's a really key thing for you to keep in mind. You have to address that question of why there. So you should look at this as an opportunity. It really does present you with an amazing opportunity to introduce and explain yourself. And the nice thing here is you have time. You have time to prepare, get feedback, and polish your documents. So you have a chance to introduce and explain yourself in a really controlled process where you can do the work up front to make sure that this first offering is a really impactful and effective one. Now, it comes with an opportunity, a big one, and I want us to focus on the opportunity. But I would be really remiss if I didn't point out that that opportunity comes with potential risks. One is not appreciating the seriousness of this part of the application. Oh, I have good grades and I've done a whole lot of research. I've done field work in this area. I have papers. Oh, I'm going to get in. This essay, not as important. That is a big risk. This is a very, very important part of the application. You can miss the mark. You can focus on the things they don't want to hear about and ignore the things they do want to hear about. You can also overshare or undershare, right? You can explain something too much, go into way too much depth about something in your personal life, overshare. You also can choose not to share, but then there's a gap or a question, or people are trying to understand what happened. When there's a gap, they try to fill in the blanks. So there's an element of oversharing or undersharing. The other place where there's a lot of risk, and maybe this is the one that's most important, are time management issues. It comes down to the wire. You're nowhere near ready. You don't have time to have it read by enough people, but the clock is ticking and you have to hit submit. Sometimes there's writer's block. Often that comes together with perfectionism. Writer's block can come for other reasons, imposter fears, making us feel like we're not ready for graduate school. That's another reason why we get writer's block. But a lot of times it comes from this desire to, in a first draft, write a perfect document. So there's no such thing as a perfect document, even after many, many, many drafts. But there are really good documents. There are documents that really present you well. I think when we put too much weight on being perfect, that each sentence is perfect, we really can get caught in some writer's block and time management issues. The third thing that I see a lot, especially in our postbacks and people who are in college when they apply, both are really intense, busy times, is that you don't set aside enough time for this. You're too busy and or overcommitted. This is a time to look at all of the things on your plate, the must-dos and the I would like to do's, the things you do to take good care of yourself, the things you do to contribute to your community. This is a time to look at all of those things and say, did I leave enough time for this really important activity? I think that what happens when we're too busy and overcommitted is we wait, then our stress goes up, and that drives writer's block. It gets closer and closer to the deadline. We're looking and hearing from other people who are finishing, we're not, so our stress goes up even more. And so this is an amazing opportunity that comes with a few potential risks. The reason I like to talk about the risks is once you know about them, you can avoid them. So this is a good time to look at everything on your plate, every ball that's juggling in your air, and asking yourself, are there some that could be put aside for a little bit? Are there some that could be minimized? Are there people I need to talk to let them know that I might be less available for this or that? Sometimes that means prioritizing, and prioritizing sometimes means we let go of something we really love. And I'm not advocating that you let go of everything you really love. In fact, I'm going to tell you the opposite. You all need to do some things that really nurture you through this process. But it might be a time to give up some of them, to do it a little bit less, to really put into priority this activity. So with that sort of general, this is an amazing opportunity, and we don't want you to get caught in some of the pitfalls. Let's dive a lot deeper. So they want to get to know you, but they want to know a certain set of things about you, right? And so let's look at all of these bullets. The first thing that they're looking to get a sense of is your preparation. And that's broadly defined. It isn't just what techniques you know or what subject matter you are an expert in. You're applying to clinical psych programs. Here's what you have done to develop your clinical psych skill set. That's one thing they want to know. But they also want more broadly defined. For example, your ability to present, to communicate, your ability to manage your time. So it's broadly defined. That goes together with the fact that you are aware of what the relevant skill set is and that you have put time and energy into developing that skill set. So these two sort of go together. Sometimes a big part of this is an explanation for a career change, a gap, a bump, a set of circumstances that led you towards where you are now. You know, career changes are not necessarily a bad thing, especially because it's sort of ludicrous for us to expect college students and postbacks to know exactly what they want. In fact, we act like little kids should know, right? Oh, what do you want to be when you grow up? It's ludicrous, right? How could anybody know? So career changes make good sense, but we want to hear about them. We want to understand them. Sometimes you need to really explain them, sometimes not so much. Readers are also looking to see if you're going to be a good fit for the school. Did you do your homework to learn about the school, right? That's another thing. They also want to get a sense that you're making a carefully considered decision. Have you looked at your options? Have you articulated clearly why you want to do this? Do you need a PhD for or an MS or a combined degree? Whatever it is you're going after, do you need that to do what you want to do? So is there some careful thought behind this? There's a desire to see how you organize information, right? Does it all the right things there, but all jumbled up, and it's like the pieces of a puzzle were thrown up and we have to find the pieces? Or do we hear a logical, coherent story? There's elements of, well, they're heading towards a career in some element of STEM. Can they think like a scientist? Meaning you're not overly enthusiastic about average data. You put your goals into perspective of bigger questions, right? Do you think like a scientist with some critical nature, with an ability to be open-minded? And then one last thing that comes out of the statement before we put this all together in the final bullet, and that is, can you write well? Now, we fully know that we are going to have to keep working with you to develop your writing skills, all of the skills that we're asking you to develop. We are well aware that we're going to keep working with you to develop these. But have you worked on them to some degree? Can you organize this material, and do you write well? So these are a whole bunch of things that the readers are looking for. In some way, all adding together to this sense that I got to know the person behind the list of experiences and the numbers, the person behind the GPA, the person behind the list of presentations they gave. Now, each and every reader has their own lens. Some of us are looking more at one thing over another. I chuckle every time I say that. Here in the OITE is someone who circles every grammatical mistake in a cover letter, in a personal statement, right? That person is really focused on some elements of the statement over others. Me, I wouldn't notice. I would never circle them, and the likelihood I wouldn't notice some of them. There would have to be a lot of them for me to focus on that. So each reader is looking through their own unique lens. And so that means you want to write something that resonates broadly for multiple people. And that's one of the things when I talk about having people read it and help you with editing that we'll come back to. Now, I started by saying we're looking for a sense of your preparation. We're looking for a sense that you are aware of what you're getting into. So I just wanted to give you some granularity in the types of things we are interested in hearing about, not because this is a checklist and you all need to address all of these. Okay, don't turn this into an activity that feels overwhelming. Well, I got 8, but not the 9th. What am I going to do? But I would encourage you, when you get these slides, to print this slide out, to look at it a little bit, to think about your developing skills, think about your the things that you like to do, the things that you feel you really have developed. Think about if there are things here where you think, I have some work in this area. Remember in the first webinar where I talked about deciding where to apply, we also had a list of, so how do you know if you're ready, right? This is a much more granular list than that. Put these two together. This is your chance to, in your essay, address critical skills and traits, to decide you want to develop some of these a little bit more, to think, am I putting myself in situations to learn this now? So this is a helpful writing slide, but it's really actually an even more helpful slide for the long term. And my guess is I missed some traits and skills, and all of you know the discipline you're heading to much better than I do. And there might be, like I'm looking here, there's nothing about coding. Right, that's pretty obvious. For some of you would be a really important skill. So you'll all add your own skills to all of this. Now we're going to talk about writing statements. So let's talk about what these statements are for graduate school. And they come in a lot of titles, and sometimes it'll say, please write a research statement. It might say, please write us a personal statement. Please give us a statement of purpose. There are also diversity statements. Lately, there have been COVID-19 statements, and some schools are asking for resilience statements. I think that the list is changing as we come to appreciate what we value in graduate students, but it can be confusing. A statement of purpose versus a personal statement versus a research statement. What are they asking for? So my advice to you in that regard is to ignore the title, read the prompt, and answer the questions that are asked of you. Do not get all caught up in what the actual title is on the application page. I realize as I list these that to apply to the NIH GPP, you submit a cover letter, right? It doesn't even say anything about a statement, right? But it does tell you in the prompt what they want in that cover letter. Every school tells you in the prompt what they want in the cover letter. Every school also tells you how much space you have. So you're going to be writing multiple essays because some schools' prompts will differ. Some will give you 2 pages. Some will give you a page. Some will say 6,000 characters. In each case, you're going to have to read the prompt. I find a lot of students get caught up in the title, and if you would just ignore the title and read the prompt, it will be much more helpful. To set the stage for success before you start writing, a couple of things. The first is get organized, update your CV now, list all of the presentations you've given, the awards, the activities you've been doing. While you might not submit that exact material later, you'll edit it, and you want to be comprehensive at the start. You want to be able to remember everything you've done, and updating your materials can help a lot. Beyond that one step, let me just say, if you want some guidance on updating your, the structure of a CV or resume for graduate school, there are a lot of resources through the OITE Career Center. There's a lot of videos on our YouTube channel. This isn't what you're going to submit necessarily. This is like the exhaustive list of everything you've done that you might or might not refer to depending on the application. The second thing to set the stage for success, appreciate there are 2 things: the actual process and then the stress that goes along with the process. So you're going to be writing lots of essays with a very high stakes outcome. By definition, that brings some stress along with it. And in fact, I think the students who do best at this, they first look at the stress of the process. They then look at the process. So tend to your well-being first and foremost. If you have an opportunity to participate in well-being webinars here at NIH on your campus, do that. If you need a reminder of how to take care of yourself, go back to some of the tapes in the Resilient Scientist series. Remember the things that help you take care of your mind, your body, your heart, and your spirit. Exercise and time off and doing things that really energize you, right? That nurture you. That's why I stressed about thinking about time management, not letting go of everything. Some of the things we do really make us manage stress much better, right? So that's number 1, tend to your well-being. Number 2, set up a realistic schedule, not one that you're gonna follow rigidly without being able to flex, not one where you're gonna be hard on yourself when you miss a deadline, but a schedule that has some nice extra time built in. So that if it takes longer or someone says, sure, I'll get this back to you tomorrow, but they don't get it back to you for 4 tomorrows, right? That you have this flexibility built in. That lowers your stress as well. And the third thing is to get organized. I recommend that people have an application notebook. That could be a virtual notebook or an in-person, hard notebook, whatever works for you. You'll want to have, something for each school. You'll want to have a section of the prompts for each of the essays. application materials, maybe the contacts, the people you've talked with. As you move towards an interview, a section on getting ready for that. Some people like a general application notebook and they start over with an interview notebook, whatever works for you. But getting organized and putting that together is a really helpful thing. Now, you're going to go to the grad fair next week. So setting this up now is a great idea because you're going to get contacts, you're going to get insights, you're going to want to make some notes. And then the third thing that I find helpful, and I do this when I apply for something, whether it be a grant or an opportunity, a job, is what I call thoughtful lead-ins. A thoughtful lead-in is a general question that will help once I start writing. So once you're writing, right, what writing have you done already that you can pull from, that helps you, that makes you helps you figure out where you're stuck, where you're not sure what to say. So I think helpful lead-ins help us sort through what is and what is not relevant. Sometimes we realize, often I realize in my lead-in essays that I overshared or that I shared unnecessary things, so I get way off topic. Also, I find this helps, and you'll see the lead-ins in a minute. I think some students really struggle with bragging. They say there's nothing special about me. I'm just an applicant to grad school like every other applicant, but we need you to take a different approach in this essay. We don't want you to be, right, a totally arrogant person, but we also want you to tell us what your successes are. And I find that some people realize as they try to do these thoughtful lead-ins that they're really struggling between this sense of bragging and this sense of humility. And that gives you a chance to find someone and talk about it. That feeds back in fact, to your well-being, right? If you're going to some support groups during this process, you have people to get support when you get stuck. You can ask somebody, does this seem like bragging to you, right? I find that this process of doing some pre-writing helps you identify the areas where you might need some support. And then you can go ahead and find mentors to talk about those areas. So I gave you some lead-ins. These are my favorite lead-ins that I used to use with my own postbacks in my group. I actually use these same lead-ins for various types of programs, postbacks who went on to law school, medical school, combined degree programs, master's level, PhD level. I find these are a really nice set of lead-ins. They're just questions. And one day you should, you have a half hour free, pick one, open up your computer and answer one of them. Why am I interested in computational biology? What have I done that sets me apart from other applicants? What are my career aspirations? Here's one that people really struggle with. What are my biggest accomplishments? And people say, I don't have any biggest accomplishments, but all of you have accomplishments that have led you to this place. There are other ones here to help you reflect a little bit on you. What obstacles have I overcome in school and in life? Are there gaps or discrepancies in my academic record that I want to explain? Another one focused on you. What personal characteristics do I possess that enhance my chances of success? This has an element of skills as well, but I encourage you to think about both of them. And then another lead-in. You can't do this for every school, but what I suggest you do is, why am I interested in this school? Imagine the perfect school. I am interested in this school because you have an unbelievably strong program in. You have these resources for students. You have a history of supporting students in exploring diversity of careers. Just imagine sort of the perfect school. Then you're going to talk about why you're interested in that school, and then you can pick and choose. A lot of what I talked about in the first unit of this series gave you some insights into unique things to look at in schools. Schools really want to know why you picked them. You need to keep that in mind. So you're really writing an essay for each school. So you're going to get a prompt, right? And the prompts, look like all kinds of things. Here's a prompt right here. Describe in your statement your reason for applying and your preparation, your research and study interests, i.e., what do you want to do once you get here, your future career plans, other aspects of your background and interests which might help us, right? There's like 5 things being asked in these 3 bullets. Highlight each of them, circle them, list them underneath, and then look. Your statement should not exceed 2 pages in length, single spaced. But ask yourself, how many people really want to read 2 full pages, single spaced, tiny little margins, really small font? Not very many people. So you'll want to write this in a realistic way and an easy way for people to read. So it begins by looking at the prompt. I'm going to give you some general rules with a caveat. A rule is meant to be broken when appropriate. Okay, so there is no template for this. There is no requirement. With very few exceptions, everything I say should be interpreted and heard through the lens of your essays and your application and modified accordingly. Okay, so this is a general structure. Most essays have an introduction, a substance, and a forward-looking ending. Okay, most of these statements, think about them, they happen in 3 time spaces. The past, what have I done that leads me to now, which prepares me for the future. Okay, so you're going to want to end by sort of pulling this all together and talking about the future. It's a chance to briefly address or amplify on your career goals. Often people will put why this program there at the end in that closing, but you don't have to. You could put it somewhere else if you feel it really fits somewhere really effectively. So we're going to look at some elements of this. Let me talk a little bit about the introduction, though, before I talk about the science, which is really, or the academic part, which is really the substance. Sometimes we get the idea that these statements have to start with a dramatic story, or we get an idea that we have to introduce everything about ourselves. Generally, that is not the case. We want to introduce ourselves, but within the context of us as an aspiring graduate student and future statistician, future social worker, future nurse, future geneticist. So this is not a personal introduction here. I grew up here, I did this, here are the experiences I had in life. You might share a little bit of that at some point. It might be very relevant to your journey. But when we talk about the introduction and sort of putting yourself out there, it's yourself within the context of your academic goal. Sometimes people get the idea you have to start with a dramatic story. You have to start with a quote from somebody famous, that there has to be this like dramatic hook to the statement. And that is absolutely not the case. In fact, I've seen lots of statements derailed by too much effort in that. Right? Lots of kids have taken apart the toaster when they were young. Lots of kids have always asked questions why from when they were a child. You know, at some point you might bring that up, but we don't need a big dramatic story about it. So the introduction is a bit about you within the context of your goals of graduate school. The substance, which we're going to talk about next, is really your research experiences. It's also other relevant experiences, but I'm going to start by talking about explaining your science. And by science, I don't mean to imply bench work. It's sort of explaining your discipline, the work that you've done to prepare yourself for graduate school within the research enterprise. So first and foremost, you need to decide which experiences to talk about. And you should do that with a focus on those that are most important to you and substantial and relevant, relatively recent. So which experiences really make you go on to graduate school? Modified by anything that I did for a long time, a full year, or I went back 3 summers, that's fairly substantial, right? So clearly they're going to want to hear about that. And recent, what are you doing right now? I say relatively because some postbacks come, they do something at NIH and they realize that they want to go back to something that they did earlier, and that that older experience might be more important. So they will shrink down what they say about their postback to make more room about what they did earlier. If you get a prompt that says list every research experience and tell us about it in 6 sentences, then you get to talk about all of them. But often as you're putting together this statement, you have to pick which ones to talk about more. Another thing that you might want to think about is if somebody is writing you a letter and you don't mention what you did with them, or the work that happened under their mentorship, that letter might seem unhinged or disconnected is probably a better word. So that's another thing. If you're asking someone to write a letter, yet it wasn't a relevant experience and you're not going to talk about it, why is that? And that doesn't mean you have to talk about it a lot. You're going to talk about some experiences in a few sentences, and some are going to be longer. It just depends. And you're going to decide based on your journey and your experiences. One thing that stresses students out that they ask about is, what if an experience was highly relevant? It really drove me towards science, but I've really made changes in my direction. So it's outside my current field of interest. It is absolutely fine to talk about those, but you should focus on elements of that experience that can be viewed as transferable. Beyond learning these techniques, I learned a lot about developing experiments. I learned a lot about working in the field. I learned a lot about animal research. I learned a lot about working in teams. You want to take that experience and start to connect it to where you're heading. I had postbacks who went in really, really different directions. One that I remember I can see him sitting in this workshop, actually, back when we did it in person. He did cell biology in my group and really wanted to do computational biology. And he had to work to connect the cell biology that he did to where he wanted to go. And he explained how the experience in my group helped him make this evolution towards being ready for a data science computational biology graduate program. So some of you will have to do that work. Some of you, it will be so relevant and so obviously attached. But both of those groups can write an outstanding essay. We know that undergrads sometimes don't get to choose. We know that you do the best that you can at the schools that you're at the summer programs you get into. So we are not looking for alignment between what you do and what you want to do. And quite frankly, even at the postbac level, we know that you don't always get a chance to do exactly what you want to do. So I really encourage you not to get caught in that. I think that's one of the things that leads to writer's block for some of our trainees. When you're explaining your science, make sure that you include the organization, department, the name of the faculty member, PI that you've worked with. And if you're here at NIH, ignore all of the jargon that we love. Don't know what the LMVR is, the DIV, the OITE, the OSD PCR. Right? Nobody outside knows any of those branches. They do know the major institutes. It would be fine to say within NIAID, I've worked in the laboratory of vaccine development, but avoid jargon and abbreviations also within your science. So this essay will be read by smart people who care about graduate education who may not know much about your field. There's a caveat to that, and I'll address it in a minute. But for the most part, you are writing to a broad audience, some of whom know very little about what you do. So when you dive too deeply into jargon, you lose them. The caveat to that is you are applying clinical psychology programs, in some computer science or math programs, biomedical program that requires you to match with a PI in advance. Then this essay is going to be written to somebody who works in a pretty closely aligned field. You're going to be talking about wanting to do things that these people know about, and hopefully you're doing some things related to that you're writing about. Then there's a little bit more space maybe to assume a really knowledgeable reader. You should assume smart, but not knowledgeable about your field. You're trying to explain a number of things, the overall goals of the group, and then within that, the specific questions you are trying to answer. So there's the context of the big picture, and then your role. You want to mention techniques that you are using, but unless they are very relevant, you don't want to mention them in depth. You don't want to go into detail. If you are applying based on this, the skills that you developed in developing this unique technique or mastering this technique, you can mention that, but generally it's a sort of broadly mentioning the techniques. If you have results, you want to mention them and what they mean, and how your work lays the foundation for future work. Do not hold yourself to the unrealistic standard that in every rotation you had results and you can put them into a broader context. A summer experience can be really just not long enough. COVID internships are really different, right? And we all know that. So do not hold yourself to an irrational standard here. However, do your best to start with the big picture, your role, what you did, what you learned, how it informs us. That's the best way to think about it. You should be clear about your role. What did you help with? What did you do with more independence? Sometimes people play a bit of a technical role in a group. People will say, I'm doing my postbac in a core facility. I don't really have my own project. Still, explain what you did with independence. You facilitated a collaboration with this one lab. You troubleshoot these particular areas. Be clear about your role. Also appreciate there. Don't set a bar that starts to make you second guess yourself. We are aware that every research structure is different. We are aware that some of you have much more independence than others. And what we're looking for is, how did you handle what you were given? Okay. Another thing to do is, sometimes people say to me, I did this as a freshman, or I did this years ago, and it was a pretty minor experience. But if it was very transformative for you, if it is a pivotal part of your decision-making, it should probably be mentioned. Now, this is explaining your science. You also remember, in this substance part, you want to highlight other relevant experiences. So maybe you wrote a report, an honors thesis. Maybe you went and presented this work at meetings on campus, presenting on your college campus, presenting at the NIH, are as valuable as presenting at national and international meetings. Okay, do not ignore those because you think, again, there's a hierarchy, especially during COVID. We know how hard it is for postbacs and student interns to get to go to a meeting. So remember, the substance is the research experiences that prepare you, but it's also other relevant experiences. Now, if you've done some of that lead-in work, you've thought a lot about what is the skill set I really need, and then it shapes this, right? You might focus a lot on the skills you learned in clinical research. You might focus on field work. You might realize how important developing, learning those computational tools on your own was, right? Each of you will focus on different relevant experiences based on that exercise that you did in the lead-ins. Now, the introduction is, here I am within the context of my academic goals, maybe a little bit about who I am personally, but mostly focused on my goals and how my life pushes me and informs those goals, right? It drives me towards specific goals. Here's what I have done to show you I am prepared. Here's what I've done to be certain I really love this. That's that big center part. And then there's an ending. This is a good place to discuss your long-term goals. This is a sort of forward-looking part. Here's what I'm going to do with this education I'm going to get, right? It's a great place to talk about what you want to do in grad school and in the future. Not that you have to be absolutely certain, but it's helpful to have some ideas. It's helpful to be able to talk about what really drives you and motivates you. This is also sometimes a good place to address issues that came up that are relevant to your educational and research journey, gaps, setbacks. It's not always the place, and I'm going to talk about that separate. And I generally tell people you want to end in a really positive way. So if you're going to bring up something at this point, you want it to be early enough so that you can still pivot towards these things, the research experiences, the other relevant experiences, together with dealing with some of these issues, have really prepared me. This is the place also where you make the why specific to each of the schools. So you need to think about what makes the program, the school, a good fit for you, and you want to tie that to your future career goals. Right? Why is it that you want to go there? Now, sometimes the fit is limited by the reality of life and geography, and you can't really tie it totally to your future career goals, but you can still look at what's special about that school. Right. So I've had students when I was at UNC who say, I'm tied to the Research Triangle Park. That wasn't what it said in the statement. In the statement, it said, I'm really interested in cancer biology, and UNC has an amazing cancer center. Then we meet them and we talk to them and we realize, or they might bring up that they really need to match at and get in at a school in the area. So think about what makes it a good fit outside of those somewhat geographic personal needs. So a good personal statement puts things into context. It is not a list of what you've done. It is a weaving together of past and current experiences, making them connected to a future goal. It's telling a story that, yes, it has twists and turns, and some things might not feel very connected. But even with that lack of connection, we can step back and talk about how we made those decisions. So it ties things together. It addresses these abrupt turns. I started out wanting to be a physical therapist. I finished physical therapy school. I treated patients. And then one day I realized I wanted to do something different. So, right, weaving that together really meant acknowledging that I had an aha moment, that I picked the wrong undergraduate major, and that I was really trying to make a dramatic career shift. So it isn't that they all naturally fit together. Sometimes they don't fit together at all, but you have added the context to help people see how it played out. A really good personal statement helps the reader see that you will contribute to their student community and that you're a good fit there. It points out your enthusiasm for being a part of a community of learners. A good personal statement gives a sense of who you are, first and foremost as an emerging scholar, student, scientist, researcher, etc., but a little bit as a person as well. Just keep the balance right. I think sometimes people try to hide everything about who they are, and they come out, they seem on paper as it's really hard to feel any enthusiasm for meeting them. On the other hand, some people focus way too much on their journey and who they are, and not enough on them as an emerging graduate student. And that hurts. When you share a little bit of who you are, it also helps us see what you're passionate about. And that goes a long way for us. All right, what is it that people really want to do? So the bottom line is a good personal statement provides an answer to this important question. Why would you be an outstanding graduate student? Now, I want to address that word outstanding. It feels heavy. Some days you're going to be just a okay graduate student. Some days you're going to be an outstanding graduate student. Some days you're going to be a graduate student with some, stresses at the moment. We are not looking for people who, bring every skill to the table. We're looking, in fact, that doesn't exist, right? Or else you wouldn't need to come to graduate school. We're looking for people who have confidence in what they know, who have enthusiasm for addressing what they don't know, who acknowledge that they don't know everything. So it is an outstanding graduate student, i.e., you have this all figured out. It's outstanding graduate student, meaning you have carefully considered why you're doing this. You have carefully considered what has prepared you. You have carefully considered what you will need to do to make the next step. Past performance is the best indicator of future behavior. So give examples. If you talk about being, persistent, and you think that that's a really important trait, show us. Don't just say, oh, I'm very persistent, right? I'm a natural born leader. Tell us, where have you been a leader? We want to see examples. So those are some things about putting together your personal statement. The balance is on you as an emerging academic, emerging scientist, emerging leader. And I don't mean academic like you have to be a faculty member. I mean somebody going to school, right? So an emerging student, right? Within the context of who you are, right? That's what a good personal statement is. We see you mostly as the graduate student you are becoming. We also learn about what prepares you, and we learn about what drives you and where you're heading. That's a good personal statement. Always right now, a lot of hands go up if we're in the room. If you could all unmute yourself, you would. There's a couple of stressful things people want addressed. So do I address gaps, setbacks, blemishes? I had to take a semester off. I had one semester where I had a really bad GPA. I started in a lab and had to leave it. I had a class 1 year where I got a D. So first of all, the start is to really be sure it needs to be addressed. In my experience, applicants often make mountains out of molehills. 1C doesn't really need to be addressed. Sometimes even a difficult semester, depending on what the GPA was, it doesn't need to be addressed. I think that the first thing is to be sure it needs to be addressed. The way to do that is to talk to knowledgeable mentors. Knowledgeable mentors, meaning people who have done a lot of graduate admissions. For many of you here at NIH in the postbac program, that does not include your PIs. They've been here and they haven't done graduate admissions across universities. In the OITE, a lot of the staff have gained that experience, not through being, on admissions committees nationally, but through doing lots of statements, talking to lots of applicants, talking to schools. And so I encourage you, if you choose to get advice from your PI and people in your group, I think that's great. But you want to also vet that advice with people who are more knowledgeable in the process through the OITE, through folks in your institute, through prior mentors who have, who have mentored you at various summer programs and things. Make sure you're talking to some people who have seen lots of essays, who have worked with lots of candidates. Sometimes you get advice that really makes you uncomfortable. Somebody tells you to hide something really important to you. Somebody tells you to put a spin on something that it doesn't feel totally right. if the advice makes you uncomfortable, you can share it with them and see what they think, or you can talk with someone else, or best thing is to do both of them. I had a student that I mentored once who had a dip in their GPA related to having a child, and they were advised by some people not to share that, right? Oh, don't say what happened, just say that there were other things going on that semester. And the student said, I love my family and they're important, and I don't think I want to hide them in a graduate school application. And that's a really valid approach, right? When I apply to things, I do not hide that I am a member of the LGBTQ community. Some people might choose to hide. We all get to choose what we share and don't share. But if someone advises you to hide something and it makes you uncomfortable, get advice from other folks. In my experience, there are all kinds of gaps, setbacks, and blemishes that can be shared with an eye towards the pride in having dealt with it. There are so many different things that we can talk about that might look like a gap or setback that really are a part of our story of success. So if you feel uncomfortable by the advice you give, reach out to other people. There is an element of how much do I want to share, right? What are the boundaries here? Will I share, and how much? But sometimes we get advice about gaps and blemishes and various things in our journey that really make us uncomfortable. So seek more advice. Consider, as you're thinking about addressing these things, if there's another place the issue could be addressed, or if this is the best place, the only place. Schools have started to really appreciate we're adding a lot of stress on you about these, and often there's a place where you can address this separate. When there is, it depends on what the issue is. So I can't really give one take-home message here, but it is worth thinking, is this the right place? And then if you choose to address a gap, a setback, a blemish, why you weren't doing research for some period of time, why you changed labs, whatever, just set appropriate boundaries for what you're going to share and how much detail you will share. And I tell people generally less is more. We do not need to know the details of your life. Remember, many, many people will be reading these. So you should, when we share things, it's because we trust the person we're sharing with, but here we don't know who we're sharing with. So I generally support an element of sharing what feels relevant within boundaries and making sure that you have put it into the context of you. Now, sometimes that's sort of some broad general stuff. Then there's the idea of poor undergrad performance. I have a GPA that doesn't really reflect my capabilities. There are reasons for that. And now I'm sitting with a GPA that isn't as strong as it could be. That can be one class. Generally, I do not believe one-off should be issued, but you could have had a real period of struggling, or, your first year was really, really tough, and yes, it got better. There are all different ways that this issue of undergrad performance comes into play. Again, you need to talk to mentors to go over your specific issues. First and foremost, when appropriate, take responsibility. Right? If you didn't address study habits, if you joined 50 clubs and 30 sports, and you didn't leave a lot of time for academics, acknowledge that. But a lot of circumstances are out of our control. Family issues, illness, the pandemic, and how that just caused havoc in people's lives. You're not responsible for things outside your control. Again, if you're going to address this by explaining things happening in your personal life with your health, appreciate that a lot of people have access to the application. So again, less is more, but you want to share enough to provide context. The admissions committee needs to understand the situation, but quite frankly, we don't need the details. Okay. You are not responsible for filling in all of the blanks. You're responsible for putting this into context. Now, sometimes it's just that we struggled and it took us a while to hit our stride, that we had ups and downs throughout. The school maybe wasn't the best fit for us. We weren't quite ready. I don't know. I had a really mixed experience in college, and some of it was just that I really could have used a lot more preparation and mentorship before I started. So I just had these hit or miss grades all along. So sometimes we just, rather than focusing on what happened, we want to really focus on the actions we took to fill in the educational gaps. I took classes at night for a few years while I was working in preparation for going to graduate school. You might have worked with people in your lab to fill in a skill set. You might have you might be taking FAES courses in the evening. It's not for the grade. It's because you really need to learn this material. So retaking courses, continuing education, and learning on the job are all appropriate approaches, but you want to provide it from the context of, I appreciate my academic record has some gaps. I appreciate there are some poor grades. I have really focused on preparing myself for graduate school in these ways. And sometimes we do choose to address that in our statement or somewhere in our written application. The third thing that really stresses people out are when you've had poor experience in a specific research group, you've changed labs, or you don't have a letter of recommendation from someone that you worked for a long time. And sometimes people decide not to address this in their statements. Sometimes they do. You know, sometimes I've seen people address this in their resilience statement. I've seen them address it in their research statement. I've seen them address it in these broader hybrid personal statements. It just depends. Another thing I'm going to say again is less is more. So be circumspect in what you share. You might have been really justified for leaving. There might be really good reasons. You don't want to go into a whole lot of detail. It is much better to let one of your letter writers address the issue of why you changed. You know, a lot of times, you change with the support of a program director, the program coordinator, the training director, OITE, someone at your school if you're watching from outside. You can share that. You found yourself in a difficult situation, you reached out and got advice, and you followed that advice. So that's another big important part to talk about. And I find, just like I say, address the academic by what have you done to solidify your skills. In this case, it's really, what did you learn from the experience, right? I gained a lot of skills in navigating conflict. I learned a lot about reaching out to other mentors. I'm going to use this material, this learning experience. I used it in transitioning to a new lab. So again, you're trying to turn what feels to you like just this major catastrophe in your experience. You're putting it into context, softening the catastrophe part by expanding on the learning part, the growth part, the how did I deal with it part. All of us are a mix of, real strengths in our application and some parts that really worry us. And for some, those worry things are really big. The answer is to talk about it early with mentors, so that it doesn't turn into writer's block. Another thing that a lot of you will need to do is address the influence of COVID-19. Some schools will ask you to do that in a separate prompt, some will not. But it is fair for all of you to acknowledge how COVID-19 has disrupted your education. You can address both personal and or educational losses. I would say one thing, that it's important to keep perspective about lost internships or lost in-school learning opportunities. It's important to keep perspective about that. This has been such a tragic experience with so much loss of life. It is fine to acknowledge I missed out on opportunities, but we want to be clear that we are putting this within appropriate context. Some of you did virtual internships last summer because you didn't have the opportunity to do an in-person one. And it's fair to acknowledge that that's not the same. However, right, you got an opportunity. What did you make of it? To me, when it comes to COVID-19 disruptions, for many, a glass full approach is better than a glass empty or a glass half empty. So point out a little bit of what you were unable to do, but really emphasize what you were able to do. Although I was unable to do an in-person internship, I threw myself into this virtual internship where I learned this and this and this. So you can do this in a separate essay, depending on your COVID experience. This could explain academic gaps. This could explain GPA issues. You know, COVID has been a difficult experience for everyone, but much more difficult for some. Another type of statement that you will be asked for potentially is a diversity statement. And I just wanted to throw one up here. They are all different. Again, you highlight the questions. What does diversity, equity, and inclusion mean to you? How could you, as a graduate student, contribute to our values and goals to diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? This is another case of highlighting the questions and making sure you answer them. In general, you should think of a diversity statement as a much more personal thing. It's your values around diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. Again, it should be tied to the academic and research environment, right? It's what will you do while you're on that campus to make a more welcoming environment, to make a more diverse environment, to contribute to increased understanding and support between individuals. So it's really a little bit about you and who you are. What diversity do you bring? Both often we go right to race and ethnicity in the United States when we talk about diversity. Gender goes right along there. But you might be from a farm, right? Coming from a really different background. You might bring neurodiversity. You might bring, you might be from a religious group that you feel brings a unique perspective. This is not a what box do I check diversity? This is who am I and what do I bring to the table? It's about how you value DEIA principles. It's how you learn about the diversity that others bring. So it isn't, here's how I check some identity boxes, i.e. I'm diverse, take me. It's here's who I am. Here's how I learn about others. And here's how I'm going to contribute to making my new home, my new graduate school home, a more welcoming and inclusive place. It's also about how you learn about barriers, whether they're structural or personal barriers, right? Barriers that make communities less welcoming to some. How will you be an ally? If you have privilege in some ways, how will you bring that privilege into the space and use it to make the space better all around? How have you worked to be welcoming and inclusive of others? And what do you want to do in the community you're going to be joining? You might emphasize some of these more than others. Some people say to me, I don't bring any diversity to a group. And I think that if that's where you start, it's a really good idea to sit for a little bit and appreciate all of the different identities you have, all of the different ways that you can come into a space and enhance it. In a nutshell, a diversity statement is about who you are, how you see others, what you now do, and what you will do in the future to actively contribute to building welcoming and inclusive communities. And everybody has a stake in that. So each and every one of us can write a diversity statement. Here are some lead-ins for writing a diversity statement. Those of you who have completed the OITE DEIA certificate program or participated in the NIH Academy, have had lots of experience in reflecting on diversity, reflecting on biases and blind spots. You've had experience engaging in community dialogues around these topics. Many of you did that in your college experience. You do that in the communities you work in. So pause and think about the work that you have done to make the academic environment, the NIH environment, wherever you are now, more welcoming and inclusive. That's what these lead-ins are about. Now, sometimes diversity statements are optional, and people say, well, I don't have any marginalized identities, so maybe I should just skip this statement. So they are optional, and you should choose. Actually, some people with marginalized identities might choose not to write a statement and say, that's for me, and I don't want to make it a part of my graduate application. I've had some students talk to me from that perspective as well. So if it's optional, you get to choose. And if you choose not to, optional is optional. Here's what I would say about it. And from the perspective of wanting culture change in science, from the perspective of wanting the next generation of graduate students to be treated better than the current generation, I think we all have responsibility to grow and learn. We all have a responsibility to be a strong ally, and we all have a responsibility to make the research community as welcoming, as inclusive as it can be. So I wonder if our hesitancy to write it shouldn't be examined for a little bit. And maybe we'll still sit with the decision not to submit it, but maybe we'll realize what the barriers are and work through them. There can be a lot of learning that comes out of writing a diversity statement, a lot of realization of what we need to do better. You know, I had to write a diversity statement for something recently, and I realized that right now I wasn't upholding my value of engaging in the community I live in. I wasn't answering some of those emails looking for folks to go to this health clinic or participate in this important activity. And it was sort of a gentle nudge to me to get back to my core values. So I would encourage you to write one, even if it feels uncomfortable, and to really sort of embrace that feeling of discomfort with some kind curiosity. Because right now in this world, talking about diversity is a tough thing. Right now in this world, talking about diversity is what we need. So that would be my thoughts on that. I want to wrap up by talking about some general writing principles. You want to be as specific and accurate as you can. You want your grammar and spelling and word choice to be appropriate. Sometimes we think in these statements we're supposed to use big fancy words that we find in the thesaurus. If you can't say it in work with a straight face, don't use the word, right? If it's just let me pick a big word to impress, big words don't impress. Be careful about lofty sounding statements that don't communicate a lot. Eliminate all the extra words you can find. As I was looking at these slides last minute, I eliminated some words. There are a lot more that need to be eliminated. Each paragraph should start with a topic sentence. It sets the stage. And then all the sentences in that paragraph should address the topic. That helps you organize things. And then finally, it can be overwhelming to look at a whole lot of small font words. So use paragraph breaks and space to make the document easy. Editing is a big part of this. You will do 3 types of editing. Very, very often people start with proofreading. That makes no sense, because don't proofread something that you're going to remove, right? You fix the grammar in a sentence you're going to take out later. So first is conceptual and structural editing, then is linguistic editing, or the flow and the word choice, and then we tighten it up. Conceptual editing is really asking the question, is my logic coherent? And have I presented that logic carefully? Are the paragraphs in the right order? Right? Conceptual editing also lets us find information that's missing or unnecessary information that we take out. Sometimes in conceptual editing, we appreciate that we've repeated something. If yes, is there a good reason for repetition? I leave in some repetition in documents of mine if it's something really important to me. but sometimes I have too much repetition and I really need to fix it. We do some conceptual editing and it leads us to linguistic editing. Have I expressed myself as clearly as possible? This is where we start looking at lots of extraneous words, lots of adjectives, very important, right? I mean, what does the word very give us there? We should be ruthless in removing extra words. We also want to look, are we using jargon? Are most of our sentences long and dense? Generally, you want short sentences. That said, too many short sentences in a row start to feel very robotic. So generally, we want some short sentences followed by some medium sized, maybe back to short. Occasionally, we have a big concept we want to explain and we put in a pretty complex sentence. Linguistic editing looks at the balance of those. All right. So you're first looking at, did I nail the general topics in an order that makes sense? Do each of my sentences really flow? And then there's spelling, punctuation, and grammar, the actual proofreading. When we have writer's block, we get lost in this. I think that it is one of the things that really gets in the way. I think because we've all heard the word proofread, edit, but there's a time and place. So really, you're going to focus on your spelling, your punctuation, and grammar after you're happy with the flow. You polish your draft yourself. You've edited it yourself. You also want to have it read by lots of different people, friends and non-scientists for general writing and flow. However, they really are not the final say, and especially family members, right? They love you. So, they're going to tell you what comes from the heart, not from the head on how does this document flow. You want to have people in your research group read it to make sure the science is accurate. And you want to have people with experience on admissions committees, either immediate, serving on them themselves, or people who have been trained in this. When you ask people to read it, ask them to read sentences they had to read twice to understand. If that's your friends and family, the science part, that's probably not a big deal. But if somebody in your lab really had to struggle to understand and experience, someone in your training office, somebody in OITE, someone in your branch, it probably, you need to look at it. I often, when I ask people to edit, I ask people to identify the unnecessary words. And that helps a lot. I find some myself, but they find others for me. And then ask them, did I miss a part of a story? All right, so you're asking people to edit. So some final tips for success: pay attention to the prompts and ask what is asked of you. Answer what is asked of you. Read the prompt. Don't get lost in, is this a research statement? Is this a personal statement? Sometimes you're only asked for a research statement and you need to put a little bit of context about you in there, right? So the title is misleading. Consider the statement like time travel. What are you doing now? What have you done in the past that leads you to now and prepares you to take this next big step? Highlight the most relevant information, relevant to grad school in general, and then say, did I nail it relative to the specific school or program? I think this means having a general template or some general templates, but you will need to personalize them, right? Sometimes not a whole lot, but often that last paragraph needs to be personalized, and depending a little bit on the structure of the program, sometimes earlier on. Edit again, and then edit some more. Just edit wisely. Don't edit too soon. It is fine for your first draft to be way over. They said 2 pages, you have 3. Way, way better than having a half a page. So just keep writing. Get advice and feedback from knowledgeable people, not only from friends, family, and near peers, There's a lot of trainees with really good intentions who say, I've been through this experience, I'll mentor you through it. I applaud that. I think that it's a kindness, but they don't have the years of experience some more senior people might have. So you want to get experience from, you want to get advice and feedback from friends, family, and near peers, but then extend beyond that. Finally, one last tip for success. This is a stressful and demanding process. There's a lot of feeling of being judged. You are being ranked and judged, right? This is true. So tend to your stress management and your resilience now. Starting September 8th, we will be hosting another round of Becoming a Resilient Scientist. The data out of the assessments of this program are pretty convincing. Students who complete the program, the 5 units and the 5 small groups, are considerably more resilient. They deal with conflict better. They feel that they are developing as scientists. There are graduate schools all over the country wanting to help students develop their resilience, and you have a chance to get a jump on that. There are some fun apps. One is the Hemingway app. There are some other ones. It's really fun. I use Grammarly sometimes, and I find that if I rely on it exclusively, it's not helpful, but at times it really helps me sort out editing. I find all my adverbs, all my really wordy sentences using some of those software. So Hemingway, Grammarly, whatever other resource you like. We will be applying to graduate school Q&A sessions. The next one is July 15. The graduate and professional school fair is July 18 to 21. There will be live workshops, online exhibitor sessions. I'll kick off the fair on Monday with some tips and to succeeding and a little bit of a broader perspective. In the fall, we will have graduate school personal statement writing working groups. That will be for current NIH postbacks. If you're at a school where you really have no resources and mentoring, please reach out to me and I'm more than happy to help. But those groups are for our postbacks. There's a great website hosted by the AAMC, and the alumni database here at NIH can help you find former postbacks at schools that interest you. We have a lot of resources. Our YouTube channel is full of resources for going to graduate school. There is another thing here not listed, which is graduate students talking about being themselves and getting support, dealing with various issues that came up for them in graduate school. That's another one worth watching. There's information on all kinds of things there. So with that, I am going to take questions. There are sample diversity statements online. In the Career Center, we are absolutely happy to read diversity statements. Something that I've heard from the folks at the postdoc level writing diversity statements for academic jobs is participating in the OITE diversity equity and inclusion seminar series has helped a great deal, but we are happy to provide feedback on that. There's a lot of questions operationally about the postbac personal statement groups, and we're going to let that go for today, and we will be sending information at the appropriate time. Are there other questions? The PowerPoint will be sent out. Yes. Here's a question. I'm a rehabilitated pre-med, and research experiences over the past 2 years made me reconsider a future in clinical medicine, work towards biomedically relevant research. Do you have advice to ensure that I convey this message in ways that show that my career goals changed and I'm not just being wishy-washy? Right. Sometimes this question goes on to say, maybe somebody thinks I'm using grad school to get into med school. A lot of postbacks, a lot of our students in the summer program said they started thinking pre-med. I mean, let's be honest, when you're growing up, very few people say, oh, you should become a researcher, but you all go to the doctor and say, oh, you're like science and you're smart. Oh, you should be a doctor. I think that you shouldn't highlight your shadowing experiences. You shouldn't dwell a lot on the pre-med, and to simply say, I explored pre-med as an undergrad, but found my niche in research is an absolutely fine way to do that. Where I think people sometimes make mistakes is they write a lot about shadowing experiences. They write about something they did in the pre-med club, and then we're reading this and we're like, well, they haven't let go of that pre-med. So it really is by highlighting the relevant experiences that works. Some applications open as early as August, and some people have the idea that applying early is better to show more interest in the program. I'm wondering if this really matters. You know, this matters. It matters if there's rolling admissions. So I'll be honest and tell you that while some administrator might look at the day you applied, very few program directors are looking at that. So you don't have to apply early just to show interest. I think that is a misnomer. Applying the last minute at 11:59 at the deadline, you know, that to me is an issue. That shouldn't happen, but you don't have to rush to get it in early. Now, sometimes a school does what's called rolling assessments, and that is that they start reading applications before the deadline has passed. If that is true, it is in your best interest to submit on the earlier side, because they might start offering people interviews. And let's say they have 60 interview slots. If they've offered 40 by the time they read your application, right, there's only 20 left. So it's a lot harder to say, well, I'm not sure about this person, but I'd love to meet them. So you do not have to apply early, you know, right at the beginning, just to show your ability to apply early and to show your interest. You don't want to apply very late because, you know, things go wrong. That said, I've met people a week before a deadline, told them to apply to something, and they've gotten in. So there is no like, it's a disaster to apply last minute, okay? But generally, don't wait too late. If there's rolling admissions, earlier is better. And I hope that helps. Should we share statements with those who will give letters of recommendation? Yes, you should. I, in fact, use those statements to help me with the letters that I have to write. That said, sometimes you share it with a person writing you a letter and they have really, really strong opinion about it, and you're happy with it, and lots of other people have read it and given you good feedback. Sometimes they have their personal view of what they want you to highlight in their group, whatever. So I would be cautious and appreciate you don't have to make every change they recommend, but I find that it can be very, very helpful to write a letter for someone who provided you with a statement. When should I start asking mentors if they will write me a letter? You know, I think that if you're applying this fall, now is the time to be connecting. If you want to ask an NIH mentor and you've only been here a little bit, you want to wait till you're about 2 weeks from the end. If you're a postbac and you've been here 6 months, it's absolutely fine to ask now. Sometimes we have to ask earlier than we would like, right? We changed labs and we have to deal with that reality. Then you ask that question in an open way. I appreciate I just arrived here a few months ago. I wonder what your thoughts are about a letter. We can counsel you and coach you on having these discussions. If you are an NIH postbac and you changed labs, I really encourage you to get advice about how to deal with that. It can be presented really in very positive ways. But I know people worry about that. So generally, you should ask Now, if it's somebody in the past, now, if you've been in the lab for a good long, or the research group, I should use research group, not lab. Now, if you've been in the research group for a pretty long time, and wait a little bit if you're a summer intern or just started. But, letters are usually due after your application is due, so you have a little bit more time. And if you're uncertain, talk to one of the pre-grad advisors in your program. Here, if you're at NIH, visit with one of us, just get a sense of what would be best. How should we ask for feedback from mentors, peers, friends? In applying to my current position, I just got it looks great, even from my prior PI. Yeah, so that is what you're going to get from some folks. And if that's what you get, you have two choices. One is to just say, okay, they're not going to be very helpful. Let me go find some other people. Your second choice is an assertiveness strategy we call positive inquiry. That's when you get this generic positive to respond back and say, thank you for that feedback. This is such an important essay. I wonder if you have thoughts about particular areas. Even if it looks good, could it be improved? That's an effort to get more from someone. It's sort of an assertiveness strategy to say, I would really value more feedback from you. It might work, it might not work. I am sorry. I feel like mentors should give more feedback than that. The reality is people can be busy. Some haven't served on a lot of admissions committees and, haven't had a lot of experience. And so they might feel unprepared for that. So just go ahead and try to get a little bit more feedback. And if you can't, move on and find people who will give you feedback. Is there an appropriate place in the application to add context to your undergraduate studies, working, participating in clubs, even if it didn't necessarily impact your grades? So it depends if you want to mention it. It's funny you mentioned sports. There was somebody on the admissions committee at UNC I served with who always highlighted when people were athletes. It was really something that he found very relevant and important for their discipline. I think that if you feel that, I said, it's you within the context of you as a scholar. And if you were working a job or you were involved in college athletics and you juggled those responsibilities and your coursework, and you did, you grew and learned through that, that's you within the context of your future. So mentioning that makes a lot of sense. If they ask you for a resilience statement and part of your story involves chronic illness that you have under control, do you suggest mentioning that? Or is that something you should cut out? Because they'll interpret it in a certain way. They'll think you need time off. So everybody gets to choose what they wish to share about themselves and what they wish not to share, right? That's what boundaries are. Boundaries are about deciding when and how to share. If there is something very, very relevant that you feel that individuals should know, you can share, putting it into the context of how you've dealt with it. Somebody who has never dealt with a chronic illness, it might look like, wow, here's somebody we don't have to worry about, but we can get on our bike and fall. We can wake up one day and feel a lump. We can, life circumstance changes. So in many, many ways, what you have dealt with in that chronic illness, what you have dealt with in those setbacks and those difficulties that you've experienced, they have prepared you for dealing with the next ones. Where people make a mistake sometimes is sharing way too much detail, right? This is not a place to go into a lot of detail. This is a place to go into how you navigated. Resilience is navigating a difficult situation with intention. It's navigating a difficult situation by using resources, seeking advice, etc. And so you can provide context. Now, you might choose to just say, I've struggled with a chronic illness. You might say, I had some serious health issues. You get to choose how much you're going to share. Some of us hide nothing. Some of us choose the context. Some of us choose never to share. We are all unique people with a very different lens about that. What I would say in general is that schools are looking for people who have navigated complicated situations. And so some level of sharing could be appropriate. Any other questions? Oh, here's one. What do you think is the better recommendation letter? A professor you were really close with, or a person you did virtual research with because of COVID for 2 semesters? I would say both of them would be really appropriate choices. That you have the option of asking more than one person. I think that how you carried yourself during a virtual summer research experience in the midst of a global pandemic, a national crisis of, so many disagreements, so many complicated things happening. I think how you turned these difficult situations into opportunities is very relevant, and hearing from a mentor who watched you do that would be really, really important. So I would suggest both. If you have a wealth of riches and you can't decide how many people to ask, you have too many people, reach out to one of the mentors, one of the pre-graduate advisors on your campus here at NIH, and go over it. There is no perfect answer. What you don't want are personal recommendations. You don't want recommendations from people that you took one class with. Okay, you want people who know you a little bit more. In an interview, will they ever ask for more details on an illness? Is that appropriate? If we choose not to expand on it, is that seen poorly? I think that it would be a real warning sign of a school if they asked for a lot of information, or really, quite frankly, any information. I think that when it comes to personal boundaries, we should be very respectful. That said, I could see a case where somebody read you talk about neurodiversity and how you navigated college as a neurodiverse individual, and somebody at a school saying, so how might we support you better? That's a really different question than tell me the details, right? So I think you want to pay attention to what exactly people ask and how they ask it. But generally, to me, and I think to many of us looking for culture change in graduate communities, we want people to respect the boundaries that students put out there, right? The honest truth is, I don't need to know the details. The honest truth is, I don't need to know details until you wish to share them with me. Now, when you don't share things happening and people see behaviors without an explanation, that can be a confusing thing. So there are times when you're going to want to go to your PI and say, I'm really struggling. You know, I have some chronic GI issues, and right now I'm not feeling well. You don't need to share a lot of details. On an application, maybe you don't need to share it at all. It is really your choice. And generally, less is more, meaning if you're going to share, remember that this is read by lots of people, and what you share should be what's required for people to understand the context. Is it more important to emphasize details of a project or skills you obtained on that project? It's more important to emphasize the skills, not the details. With a few caveats, if you're applying directly to work with a PI in a clinical psych program, the details could really tip the balance in going into some depth. Again, if that's the same, if it's another type of graduate program where you have to match with somebody right away. But generally, you don't want to give a lot of in-depth details. I'm a master's student. Regarding submitting a reference letter from a thesis advisor, if they don't agree to submit it, not agreeing to submit it, they want me to stay. You know, I'm a little bit uncertain of what that question is. If somebody says they don't want to submit a letter, you should not, you just need to move on and not have a letter from that person. But I'm concerned that I'm not understanding that question correctly, and you can just reach out to me by email and I will make sure I understand, or you can try again to reframe the question, and perhaps I feel like I'm just not certain of what you're asking, and perhaps if you reframe it, I will get it. What about deciding between a professor versus a professor you're closer to? So a professor from research that you want to highlight that you're not close to versus a professor you're closer to character and student wise who is on your thesis committee. I think you have to have some letters from people you did research with. But if this was undergrad, you're here now, you're going to have a letter from research people here. I think that it's a little bit of a toss-up and you should go with which one feels more comfortable. If the PI really doesn't know you, that letter isn't going to be as good as the PI on your committee who really knew you, or the faculty member who really knew you. But some of your letters need to be from people who know you within the research space. Okay, so that question is answered in part by knowing who else is writing letters. What about deciding between a professor from research? Oh, no, I got that one already. Sorry about that, Ivy. I'm going to try to answer that twice. All right. Is there anything that I have missed? Is it unusual to ask for recommendation letters from professors you have a close relationship with, but who have not taught you or mentored you in a year or two? It is absolutely fine to have a letter from somebody that you have not interacted with in a year or two. You don't want all of your letters to be from individuals like that. You want at least one very modern, not modern, very in the now. I'm losing my words at this moment. You want one letter from now, recent. Thank you, Gail, or whoever that was who helped. You need at least one recent letter and preferably 2 recent letters. But somebody, especially if you've kept up with them, that's great. If you haven't kept up with them, but you update them, that's okay too. I had a meeting last Friday with a graduate student of mine. I think he graduated in 2010 and he needs something from me, and he updated me, and I have no problem. And I haven't heard from him in a good long time. We both acknowledged we were busy. We were sorry we hadn't been able to connect. We noted that we used to bump into each other at meetings, but the pandemic has stopped that. We connected, he updated me, and I said, more than happy to write a letter. And then I said, please send me an updated CV. So you can go back to somebody a couple years in the past and reconnect. Is it acceptable to have someone from NIH as a letter writer as opposed to letters exclusively from your home university? Yes, it is absolutely fine to have letters from people at NIH. If you were a summer intern, that's an appropriate letter potentially. If you're a postbac, it is absolutely an appropriate letter. I think that there's something very positive about having a letter from somebody outside your college, right? You moved somewhere, you got to know new people, you integrated into a new environment. So I think that it's a really, really good idea to get a letter from someone here. If you're here as a summer intern, ask towards the end of your summer experience. If you're here as a postbac, you can ask at any time. I have worked with both a staff scientist and PI. Is it appropriate to have them both write letters? You know, in general, in some ways that could be viewed as a redundant letter. My advice would be either that there's one letter that they co-sign together. That is one way I see that handled. Occasionally a student decides that the 2 people really know them in very different contexts and that it feels like a good idea. There is no wrong. Well, there are wrong friends, family members, people who know you in clubs, in non-academic spaces. There are some unfortunate choices, but you know, when it comes to something like that, do I ask the staff scientist or the PI? Do I ask the postdoc or the PI? You know, it's a little bit context specific. I'm going to say one thing. I don't like to say it. It bothers me. to say it, but I do think that there is a general desire to see letters from people who have completed an advanced degree. So better from the head of the lab than technician. And it might be that the technician works with you really closely and has a whole lot to say. If that technician has a PhD, master's, right, they should use that title in the letter, but generally people are looking the highest up in the hierarchy as possible. I think that's unfortunate because I think the people who see you day to day can talk most to your character, your ability to navigate tense situations, your ability to be a good team player. But I think I need to give you honest advice. In the why section, is it a really good or bad idea to tell them directly that they are a top choice? I think it's completely appropriate to say, I am very excited about this school because some of you might want to go and say, in fact, I'm your, this is my top choice. It's up to you. You can just say, I'm interested, when you can convey how excited you are in a variety of ways. Nothing wrong with sharing that. What you don't want to share is a school where, I'm not that interested, but you are in an area I want to live in. And you chuckle, you're probably thinking nobody did that, but I said that because I've read that about 4 or 5 times. Anything else? I hope to see you all at the grad fair. We kick off Monday. I don't know whether it's 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, or noon, but sometime Monday. There are already resources up on the Whova site. There are already ways for you to engage with other applicants, ways for you to start building your schedule, find yourself some quiet time. It will start at noon on Monday. Thank you, Yewan. I really look forward to seeing you all there. I love talking about applying to graduate school because it's such a special time to really begin this journey. So thank you all for being here. It was really great to see you.